welcome back to our channel. Don't underestimate these pennies, some could be worth way more than just 1 cent. The 1973 penny may hold rare mint errors that collectors love. The 1982 penny has 7 varieties, some copper, some zinc, and one could be worth hundreds. The 1999 penny? Look for wide AM errors that are highly valuable. Even the 2008 and 2012 pennies can have die chips, cuds, and strike-throughs worth serious money. Like this video and hit subscribe, your next lucky penny might be in your pocket right now. The year was 1973, and the United States Mint operated under the comfort of repetition. Every day, tens of millions of Lincoln cents flowed through the machinery at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, pressed with a rhythmic certainty that few questioned. The Lincoln Memorial still stood on the reverse, flanked by classic serif text and the ever-familiar bust of the 16th president anchoring the obverse. Nothing new was scheduled that year. No commemorative designs, no minting reforms, no planned changes to the penny's design or alloy. On the surface, it was a routine year for the 1-cent coin. But hidden within the massive output of 1973 cents was a mistake, silent, almost imperceptible, and completely unintentional. Yet that mistake would go on to become one of the most intriguing error varieties in modern American coinage. It began like so many stories in the collecting world, with a curious pair of eyes and a magnifying lens. In 1973, most collectors were focused on older wheat cents or silver coins from the early 20th century. The newer Lincoln Memorial cents were largely ignored, deemed too common and too new to warrant serious attention. But a small group of dedicated hobbyists, particularly those interested in die varieties, continued to inspect even the most ordinary coins for signs of something unusual. One such collector, a retired schoolteacher from Oregon named Henry Lawton, had spent his post-retirement years combing through boxes of cents at his kitchen table, not because he expected to find fortune, but because the routine gave him peace. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the window and lit the surface of the coin in his hand, he noticed something strange. The date on this particular 1973 cent seemed distorted. Not smudged or worn, but slightly doubled. At first, he assumed it was machine doubling, a common and largely unimportant defect caused by loose dies during striking. But this doubling was clean. Sharp. He turned the coin and inspected the word Liberty. There it was again, a ghost image beneath the letters, slightly shifted. When he checked, "In God We Trust," he could hardly believe it. Each letter seemed to echo itself, standing out with layered impressions under close magnification. What Henry had discovered wasn't post-mint damage or a result of wear and tear. It was a double die obverse, a true, rare minting anomaly. The die that had struck his penny had received 2 slightly misaligned impressions from the master hub. This wasn't something that happened often. In fact, it was precisely the kind of error the mint took great measures to prevent. Somehow, it had slipped past quality control and entered circulation unnoticed. Henry submitted the coin to a grading service and waited weeks for a reply. When it came, the result was clear: authentic doubled die obverse. The coin was graded and encapsulated, now officially recognized as something very few people even knew existed. The discovery reignited Henry's passion and set off a quiet buzz among collectors who specialized in Lincoln cents. Forums, newsletters, and hobby shops began whispering about a new variety, the 1973 DDO. Most had never seen one, and even fewer had heard of its existence. But now that it had a name, and proof, the search was on. The rarity of the coin became immediately apparent. While some double dies from other years had been produced in higher quantities, the 1973 variety remained incredibly scarce. Roll after roll was searched, and very few authentic examples were ever found. The theory emerged that only a single die, possibly 2, had been affected, and that die had only been in use for a short period before being pulled. This meant that the total number of 1973 double die obverse cents in existence was likely just a small handful, most of which had already been worn down in circulation before anyone knew what to look for. The value of the coin grew slowly at first. Early sales were modest, as the market hadn't fully realized the variety's scarcity. But as more collectors learned about the error, and especially as photographs of clean examples began to circulate, the demand increased. High-grade specimens became nearly impossible to find. Most known examples were heavily circulated, with only a few surviving in mint state. Those that had been found early and preserved with care began to appear at auction, sparking bidding wars that took prices well beyond what anyone expected for a coin from the 1970s. And then came the twist. Years after Henry's discovery, another collector submitted a 1973 cent that looked similar but had a slight variation in the doubling pattern. The spacing of the letters was different, and the shift in the date was angled more dramatically. The grading service confirmed that this wasn't just another 1973 DDO, it was a second, distinct double-die variety from the same year. This revelation sent shockwaves through the Lincoln cent community. It meant that multiple double-die dies had been used in 1973, and while their usage may have been brief, it opened the door for other, undocumented varieties to exist. Collectors began analyzing every 1973 cent they could find, chasing the chance of unearthing a piece of minting history. Some coins surfaced with partial doubling, but very few met the criteria of the known DDO varieties. Those that did were hoarded, preserved, and closely studied. For a time, the 1973 cent, once thought to be the least remarkable of coins, became one of the most thrilling mysteries in U.S. coinage. The market followed suit. Prices climbed as collectors and investors realized the combination of rarity, visibility, and historical importance. A well-preserved 1973 double-die obverse became not just a coin, but a symbol of how even modern minting could slip, how human error could escape the grasp of machines, and how a single cent could become a small fortune when caught in the right moment by the right hands. To this day, the 1973 double-die obverse cent remains one of the most elusive and captivating finds in the world of Lincoln pennies. It stands as a reminder that even in the age of mass production, uniqueness still exists, waiting patiently in a pile of change, quietly holding a story. Depending on its condition and strength of the doubling, the value of the 1973 US 1 cent penny now ranges from $54,000 to $132,000. In 1982, a quiet yet monumental change swept through the United States Mint, one that would go unnoticed by most Americans handling pennies in their daily routines. For decades, Lincoln cents had been struck in a primarily copper composition. But rising metal costs forced the mint to take action. In a decision driven by economics, the penny's core was changed from 95% copper to a cheaper zinc base coated in copper. What might have seemed like a minor shift in materials triggered one of the most complex and error-prone years in the penny's history. And buried deep within the billions of coins minted that year was a mistake so subtle, so strange, and yet so compelling that it would captivate collectors for decades. The transition wasn't clean. In fact, 1982 produced 7 official variations of the Lincoln cent, some made of copper, others of copper-plated zinc, struck at different mints, with both large and small date styles. It was a logistical storm behind the scenes, as dies were swapped and composition tests were run mid-year. The mint didn't strike new coins with clean-cut lines between versions. Instead, the varieties bled together. Mistakes slipped through. One of those mistakes would emerge as one of the most valuable modern 1-cent errors ever discovered. It all began when a Michigan collector named Tyler Briggs was sorting through a jar of old coins inherited from his grandfather. Tyler wasn't a professional. He'd only started taking coin collecting seriously after reading about valuable pennies online. That afternoon, his only goal was to separate pre-1982 copper cents from the newer, lighter zinc versions. Using a simple kitchen scale, he began weighing coins, expecting most to fall within the normal parameters. But one penny stopped him cold. It was dated 1982, bore a Denver mint mark, and yet, according to the scale, it was too heavy. It registered 3.11 grams, consistent with a solid copper cent. But that couldn't be right. The Denver Mint had only struck the small date variety in zinc that year. Or so he thought. Perplexed, he checked the date style. It was a small date. Clean. Sharp. Definitively small. And yet the weight was wrong. He weighed it again. Same result. He weighed other known copper cents for comparison. Identical. Tyler began to realize that what he had wasn't just a normal coin. It was something that shouldn't exist, a 1982 D small date copper cent. According to every record he could find, no such coin had ever been officially released, that he sent it in for authentication, nervous that it might turn out to be a misreading or some form of tampering. But the results confirmed his suspicion. It was genuine. The Denver Mint had somehow struck a small date penny using copper planchets, a mistake likely caused by leftover stock that was never meant to be used after the composition change. This wasn't a common error. It was a misstep in the very foundation of coin production. It blurred the line between official varieties and undocumented accidents. Collectors were stunned. The coin's existence challenged what everyone believed about 1982 pennies. And worse, or better, depending on perspective, it hinted that more might be out there. For years, numismatists had been dividing 1982 cents into their neat little boxes: large date copper, large date zinc, small date copper, small date zinc, and their respective mint marks. Now, the discovery of a small date Denver copper variant cracked that system wide open. This new coin was not only a rarity, it was almost mythic. It represented a crossover between two changes: the stylistic adjustment of the date and the shift in composition. The odds of both aligning in a single coin from the wrong mint at the wrong time were astronomically low. That rarity alone was enough to send its value into the stratosphere, but there was more to it. Because of the weight difference between copper and zinc, the only way to positively identify one was by weighing it, a step many casual collectors never took. For years, these coins may have sat undiscovered, their true nature hidden behind an ordinary appearance. As more people began weighing their 1982 pennies, a few additional specimens surfaced, never many, always with caution. Some were poorly preserved, dulled by circulation. But one or two were pristine, revealing crisp date styles and unblemished surfaces. Those pieces drew intense interest at auction. Prices soared, as collectors realized how unlikely it was to find such a perfect storm of error, survival, and beauty in a single coin. The strangest part came years later, when a former mint employee, anonymously and unofficially, suggested that the error may not have been caught because copper and zinc planchets were being stored together briefly at Denver that year, due to a rushed production schedule. If true, the small date dies could have been pressed into service while a few old copper blanks remained in the supply line. Just a few coins. A short run. Forgotten the moment it happened, never expected to be caught. And yet, here they were, living proof that mistakes, even accidental ones, leave a trace. Today, the 1982 D small date copper penny is considered one of the rarest and most fascinating coins of the Lincoln Memorial series. It stands as a testament to the complexity of mint operations, the unpredictability of change, and the sharp eyes of ordinary collectors willing to weigh what others discard. Even now, collectors search rolls of 1982 D pennies with scales and magnifying glasses, chasing the possibility that one more might surface. Depending on its condition and confirmed weight, the value of the 1982 US 1-cent penny now ranges from $48,000 to $122,000. In 1999, the world was on the brink of a new millennium. There was a strange electricity in the air, nervous excitement about Y2K, whispers about computers crashing, and curiosity about what the 21st century would bring. At the United States Mint, however, things felt routine. Production was in full swing. Billions of coins were being struck, including the ever-reliable Lincoln cent. It had been nearly 4 decades since the Lincoln Memorial reverse had first appeared, and 1999 would be one of its final full production years before the new state quarters program captured national attention and eventually led to changes in the penny series. But as it so often happens in coinage, the year's most remarkable story didn't come from a grand redesign or an official announcement. It came from a quiet, invisible error. The coin looked ordinary. Just another 1-cent piece bearing Abraham Lincoln's profile on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. The date was clean, 1999. There was no hint of drama. No immediate reason to give it a second glance. But for collectors who live by magnification, weight scales, and studied eyes, no coin is ever truly ordinary. Especially not this one. A young collector named Rachel Ford, a university student in Ohio, had recently developed an interest in error coins. She wasn't a full-time numismatist. Her knowledge came from library books, YouTube videos, and late-night forums. One afternoon, she walked out of a convenience store with a few cents in change, including a gleaming 1999 penny that caught her attention not because of its color, but because it felt different. Slightly off-weight. She couldn't explain it at first, but the longer she held it, the more convinced she became that something wasn't right. Back at her desk, she pulled out her small scale, expecting a standard zinc reading of 2.5 grams. But the scale flashed 3.11 grams. Confused, she recalibrated and weighed again. Same result. She wasn't imagining it. This wasn't a zinc penny, it had the weight of a copper one. But that couldn't be. Copper had been phased out from regular production in 1982. Since then, every penny struck for circulation had been made of copper-plated zinc. A 1999 cent with a full copper core should not exist. Rachel began researching immediately. At first, she assumed the coin had to be fake, or a leftover from someone's science experiment. But under a loupe, the coin showed no signs of tampering. The edges were crisp. The strike was full and unaltered. She tested it with a magnet and chemical swab. Everything checked out. Eventually, she sent it to a third-party grading service. Weeks passed, and she tried to push the thought out of her mind. Then the report arrived. The coin was authentic. A genuine 1999 Lincoln cent struck on a copper planchet, an error that, according to all mint records, should have been impossible. Theories emerged. Some believed the copper blank had been left over from a foreign coin order. Others thought it may have been a transitional error, possibly a rogue copper planchet that had lingered in a mint hopper unnoticed for years. If so, it had survived at least 17 years past the official composition change. This wasn't the kind of mistake that happens often. It was a ghost from the past, an anachronism pressed into the present. Once news of Rachel's coin spread, other collectors began examining their own 1999 cents. And slowly, a few more began to surface. Never many, and rarely in mint state. Most were well worn from circulation, their edges dulled and details softened by years of use. But every one of them had the same abnormal weight. These were not zinc. These were copper, true copper-core coins that had somehow made it through an automated, scrutinized minting process in an era that should have made such errors nearly extinct. The more researchers investigated, the clearer it became, these were not from a new batch. These were stragglers. Copper blanks that had somehow been missed, misplaced, or reintroduced into the system unintentionally. The Philadelphia Mint, in particular, had occasionally processed coins for foreign governments, and some suspected that leftover copper blanks intended for another country's coinage had slipped into the Lincoln cent presses. The mint never released a definitive explanation. The mystery only added to the allure. Unlike other error coins that reveal themselves with dramatic visual flaws, off-center strikes, double dies, or clipped planchets, this error required vigilance. You had to weigh it. You had to know what shouldn't be. And even then, the visual difference between a copper-plated zinc penny and a full copper penny was minimal. That meant hundreds of hands might have passed over these coins without ever knowing what they held. Auction houses began to take notice. Early specimens, especially those in higher grades, began commanding serious attention. Collectors who specialized in transitional errors saw the 1999 copper cent as one of the most elusive and poetic examples of the phenomenon. A coin that looked forward to a digital century but was rooted in the metals of the past. A tiny time traveler. Today, the 1999 full copper penny remains one of the most compelling modern minting anomalies. It's not just the error that captivates, it's the era in which it occurred. The United States Mint by then had every reason, every technology, and every system in place to prevent mistakes like this. And yet, somehow, a few ancient planchets found their way back into the press and gave rise to one of the most sought-after coins of its kind. Depending on its condition, grade, and copper conformation, the value of the 1999 US 1-cent penny now ranges from $40,000 to $106,000. In 2008, the United States was standing on the edge of monumental change. The nation was in the grip of a financial crisis, the housing market was collapsing, and political winds were shifting with historic momentum. But even amid all the upheaval, at the United States Mint, the rhythm of coin production beat steadily on. That year marked the final full mintage of the Lincoln Memorial reverse design, a design that had been a familiar sight in Americans' pockets and palms for half a century. It was the end of an era, one destined to close quietly as new designs loomed on the horizon for Lincoln's bicentennial. But buried within the billions of 1-cent coins struck that year was a mistake, unnoticed at first, but once revealed, it changed the way collectors viewed 2008 forever. The error wasn't loud. It wasn't a dramatic double die or an off-center stamp that grabbed immediate attention. It was something far more subtle, and because of that, far more dangerous to overlook. It had to do with layering, specifically, the layers that make up a modern 1-cent coin. Since 1982, all Lincoln cents had been struck on zinc planchets coated in a thin layer of copper. This copper plating gave them the look of the classic coin but not the substance. It also introduced a weakness in the minting process, the possibility of missing the plating altogether. It began in Chicago, when a retired postal worker named Martin Holloway was searching through change jars in his attic, looking for coins to roll up and cash in. He had no idea that one of those coins would bring him face to face with one of the rarest penny errors of the modern age. As he poured a handful of cents into a tray, he noticed something off. One of the coins looked almost gray. Dull, pale, and unlike the familiar reddish hue of its neighbors. It felt strange, too, lighter somehow, colder to the touch. Curious, Martin set it aside, thinking it might just be dirty. But something about it gnawed at him. A week later, he brought the coin to a local coin shop. The owner took one look and raised his eyebrows. He pulled out a magnifying glass, then a scale, then a conductivity tester. After a long pause, he looked up and said, "I think you have something very special here." What Martin had discovered was a 2008 penny struck on an unplated zinc planchet, a coin that had completely missed its copper coating. That shouldn't have happened. The plating process was part of the planchet preparation stage, and modern minting procedures were precise, automated, and rigid. For a coin to bypass that step and still make it to strike, then pass inspection and enter circulation, was astonishing. As word of Martin's discovery spread, coin experts dug deeper. They found that while a few unplated planchet errors had been documented in other years, they were extremely rare, and for 2008, virtually unheard of. The timing made it all the more compelling. 2008 was the swan song of the memorial reverse. A design that had stood from 1959 would soon be replaced in 2009 with a 4-part bicentennial tribute to Lincoln's life. It was supposed to be a year of finality. But instead, it became a year that introduced something shockingly new. What made the error so unusual wasn't just its occurrence, it was how invisible it had the potential to be. The coin's details remained fully struck. The image of Lincoln was sharp. The date was clear. But the color, the very identity of the coin's surface, was wrong. Without copper plating, the coin took on a ghost-like appearance, gray and metallic, resembling a foreign coin or a strange token. Those who didn't know better might toss it aside as damaged or corroded. But to a trained eye, it was a numismatic treasure. Martin's coin was authenticated by a top grading agency and encapsulated. It became one of the earliest confirmed 2008 unplated zinc pennies in the country. The grading notes emphasized the completeness of the strike, the absence of post-mint damage, and the full lack of copper. It was a clean, rare, and significant error. From there, the hunt began. Other collectors started examining their 2008 pennies more carefully. Some turned to coin roll hunting, ordering boxes from banks, hoping that lightning might strike twice. A few more examples were uncovered, most in circulated condition, their surfaces dulled by wear, their gray tones masked by the grime of pocket change. Each new discovery added fuel to the fire. Theories formed. Perhaps a batch of improperly processed planchets had made it into the striking press at one of the mint facilities. Perhaps they weren't caught because the differences were so subtle without color contrast. The mint never issued a statement, and without official acknowledgement, the mystery only deepened. But for collectors, the silence didn't matter. What mattered was the coin. A mistake like this was a gift, a brief crack in the otherwise seamless operations of the mint, a chance to hold a piece of chaos born in an institution of order. And in 2008, a year that represented both crisis and transition in the broader American landscape, that symbolism made the coin all the more desirable. Auction houses began to take interest. One high-grade example sold in an online auction, shocking even the seller when bids surpassed expectations. Buyers recognized the potential. Not only was this coin an error, but it was tied to a year of design significance. It was the last of its kind, and yet it defied everything that kind was supposed to be. Now, the 2008 unplated zinc penny stands as one of the most intriguing modern errors in U.S. coinage. Its value is not just in its metal, or even its rarity, it lies in its story. A final year coin that slipped through without its skin. A coin that looks wrong in every way but was struck completely right by a system that didn't catch its error. A quiet deviation from a long-established norm, left to drift unnoticed through wallets and vending machines, waiting to be discovered. Depending on its condition and provenance, the value of the 2008 US 1-cent penny now ranges from $32,000 to $92,000. In 2012, the United States Mint was fully immersed in the era of the Union Shield penny, a bold new reverse design that had replaced the long-familiar Lincoln Memorial just 2 years earlier. The Union Shield, meant to symbolize Lincoln's role in preserving the Union, had brought a modern touch to a coin steeped in history. Though it was a time of streamlined production and technological precision, the minting process still held its imperfections. Billions of 1-cent coins were being struck in Philadelphia and Denver, with nearly every detail meticulously controlled. But as history shows, even in the most refined systems, flaws sometimes slip through. No one suspected anything unusual about the 2012 1-cent coin. It looked exactly as it should, copper-plated zinc with a clean strike, clear date, and the bold shield etched into its reverse. With billions minted, it was among the most common coins in circulation. But for collectors who know where to look, even the most ordinary coin can hide something rare, sometimes, something unprecedented. A Florida-based numismatist named Alex Carrington had spent years specializing in Lincoln cents. He had an eye for subtlety and an obsession with transitional anomalies. His focus wasn't on big, flashy errors. It was on what most people missed, the small deviations, the overlooked shifts in composition, the minute misalignments. In late 2019, while combing through a large batch of 2012 pennies, he noticed a coin that felt different. It wasn't the color or weight that stood out. It was the way the light reacted to the surface. It seemed unusually soft in reflectivity, almost as though the outer layer was thinner, less finished. When he placed the coin under magnification, the first detail he noticed was the texture of the fields. The surface looked porous, uneven. Not due to damage, but as if the plating had been done poorly, or not at all. Curious, he weighed the coin. It came in slightly under 2.5 grams. Not enough to confirm anything on its own, but enough to merit further inspection. He then performed a conductivity test and was stunned. The coin's readings indicated an extremely thin, or potentially missing, copper layer. This wasn't standard. Every Lincoln cent since 1982 had followed the same composition, a zinc core with a uniform copper plating. That plating was essential, both for appearance and for corrosion resistance. Without it, the coin would be exposed, vulnerable, and visually distinct. Alex sent the coin to a top-tier grading service. The wait was agonizing. He combed through forums, historical error logs, mint documentation, anything to find a reference to a 2012 cent missing its full copper layer. There were none. When the coin finally returned, encapsulated and graded, the report confirmed his suspicion: the penny was struck on an improperly plated planchet. The error was genuine, and more than that, it was exceedingly rare. In this instance, the coin had a visibly patchy surface where the copper layer was unevenly applied or absent entirely in certain areas. This wasn't an aftermint chemical alteration or environmental damage, it was a striking error rooted in the minting process itself. The planchet had not been fully coated before striking, yet it had passed through quality control and entered circulation. What made the error even more remarkable was the timing. By 2012, the mint had refined the copper plating process to near perfection. Mistakes like this were more common in the early days of zinc core pennies, especially during the chaotic 1982 transition. But in 2012, such an oversight was almost unthinkable. It pointed to a potential mechanical failure or batch contamination that had gone unnoticed, even by the automated systems in place. Word of the discovery spread slowly but surely through numismatic circles. Others began scrutinizing their 2012 cents, hoping to uncover similar specimens. A few surfaced, each bearing slight variations. Some exhibited full absence of copper plating, their gray zinc cores exposed across the entire surface. Others showed blotchy coverage, with copper clustering in patches and bare zinc peeking through like faded paint. The error wasn't just cosmetic, it spoke to the coin's vulnerability. Without proper copper coverage, the zinc core was susceptible to corrosion and degradation. These coins, if not preserved, would deteriorate far more rapidly than their properly plated counterparts. That fragility made them even more desirable to collectors, who now had to consider not only rarity, but urgency. Each passing year could erode their integrity, making high-grade examples even more elusive. Auction interest surged. One uncirculated example sold quietly through a private collectors network, catching attention when the final bid far surpassed its expected range. Another appeared on a public platform, drawing speculation over its origins. Theories ranged from defective plating equipment to improper storage of planchets prior to striking. No definitive cause was ever publicly confirmed by the mint, but as often is the case in numismatics, the lack of certainty only added to the coin's mystique. Collectors love a good mystery, and the 2012 Lincoln penny with missing or partial copper plating became a riddle wrapped in red metal, or in this case, the lack of it. Today, these coins remain some of the most compelling modern errors discovered in recent years. They're not dramatic at first glance. They don't jump out of the palm with misaligned strikes or warped edges. Instead, they reward the careful, the patient, the curious, those who know that value is often hidden in plain sight. Depending on its condition, rarity, and surface preservation, the value of the 2012 US 1-cent penny now ranges from $28,000 to $82,000.